Pope Leo XIV. A saint or a shadowy puppet? In the grand halls of the Vatican, where ancient stone walls whispered of centuries past, a storm was brewing. Cardinals in crimson robes moved like shadows beneath towering frescoes, their solemn faces betraying whispers of doubt. Smoke would soon rise from the Sistine Chapel, white or black, and the world would know the name of the next pope. But even before the sacred smoke curled toward the heavens, secrets had already begun to spread. The name whispered among the cardinals was one that few had expected: Leo XIV. He was a humble bishop, a quiet man of faith, plucked from a small diocese far from Rome's grandeur. His sermons were gentle, his life simple, his presence almost invisible among the powerful men who claimed to shape the church. But those who knew the Vatican's darker corridors spoke of another truth. Leo XIV's rise was no miracle. It was a carefully orchestrated maneuver, a silent game played by shadowy hands. Beneath the marble floors and sacred halls, an unseen council of power brokers whispered of a pope they could control, a man who would wear the robes of holiness, but dance to their tune. Yet as the white smoke rose and the bells of St. Peter's Basilica thundered, a strange feeling swept over the crowd. Who was this quiet man stepping onto the grand balcony, his face solemn, his gaze calm? Was he truly a saintly shepherd of faith, or something far more sinister? In the shadows, a cardinal smiled. "He is ours," he whispered to his companion. But as the new pope raised his hands to bless the crowd, a flicker of something else crossed his eyes. A calm that was too calm, a peace that felt like a mask. Leo XIV had ascended, but the question hung in the air. Was he a saint blessed by divine will, or a shadowy puppet pulled by hidden strings? And while the crowds cheered below, within the hidden corridors of the Vatican, another game had already begun. Letters were exchanged in darkness, secret oaths were whispered, and unseen eyes watched the new pope's every move. For those who placed him on the throne did not simply give power, they expected obedience. But as Leo XIV settled into his grand chambers, a silent determination grew within him. He had worn the mask they gave him, but beneath it, his mind was sharp. He saw the shadows around him. He felt the strings they tried to pull, and he whispered a quiet prayer to himself. "God, grant me the wisdom to see my enemies and the courage to be more dangerous than they ever imagined." This was not just a papacy, it was a battlefield. From the moment Leo XIV ascended, the Vatican became a theater of whispers. Cardinals who once walked boldly now moved like shadows, their faces etched with doubt and suspicion. Beneath the golden frescoes and the divine light, something darker stirred. Leo's every decision was watched, every word noted, every silence questioned. The council that had placed him on the throne whispered among themselves. Their chosen puppet was meant to obey, not to question. But Leo was not the docile figure they imagined. Behind his gentle sermons and humble prayers, he listened, he watched, he learned. A network of loyal priests and young clerics who admired his quiet strength began to form around him. "Your Holiness, they watch you," whispered Father Matteo, a young, sharp-eyed priest who had become one of Leo's closest confidants. "Every letter you write, every visitor you receive, they seek to control you." "Let them watch," Leo replied, his voice calm but his eyes fierce. "Let them believe they hold the strings. A puppet that sees its strings can also cut them." But even as Leo planned his quiet rebellion, his enemies planned his fall. The council met in secret, whispering of a successor, plotting whispers of scandal and disgrace. A forged letter here, a whispered accusation there, the poison of lies began to spread. Yet Leo's calm never broke. He preached of faith, of humility, of forgiveness. But in the shadows he spoke of courage, of truth, of the battle against darkness. And soon, the council would learn that they had not placed a puppet on the throne. They had awakened a lion. Leo XIV was not just a pope. He was a survivor in a city of saints and serpents. His quiet strength became a whisper of rebellion, and his enemies soon realized they had not crowned a puppet, but unleashed a storm. As Leo moved through the grand halls of the Vatican, the shadows thickened. Letters vanished from his desk, words whispered behind his back grew louder, and the council's eyes followed his every step. But Leo saw more than they knew. He saw their whispers. He saw the strings they tried to weave around him. One evening, as Leo sat alone in his chambers, Father Matteo entered, his face pale. "Your Holiness," he whispered, "they plan to replace you. Letters have been sent to distant cardinals. Your allies are being reassigned. Your reputation is being poisoned." Leo's face remained calm, but his eyes burned. "Then we must strike first." He called his closest confidants, priests who believed in his quiet strength, men who had seen the darkness and dared to stand against it. "We fight shadows with shadows," Leo declared. "We expose the darkness by letting it reveal itself." Under his command, secret letters were intercepted, whispers were twisted, false accusations were turned back on their accusers. The council members who had whispered of his fall now found themselves whispered against. But the council did not give in. They whispered of poison in Leo's wine, of blades in the darkness. A trusted cardinal was found dead, a dagger in his chest, a warning to the Pope. But Leo stood firm. He moved not as a saint, but as a strategist. His sermons spoke of faith, but his letters whispered of resistance. He used confessionals not just for absolution, but for information. Every whispered sin became a weapon, and soon his enemies began to turn on each other. Those who conspired against him whispered of betrayal, doubted their allies, and in their fear they revealed their darkest secrets. But Leo knew that shadows never died. They only moved. And as he stared into the candlelight of his chamber, he whispered a quiet prayer. "God, grant me the wisdom to be the light in the darkness and the courage to walk through it without fear." The battle for the soul of the Vatican was far from over. It was only just beginning. The Vatican had become a den of whispers, but now the whispers grew into a storm. The council, those shadowy figures who had once placed Leo XIV on the papal throne, now saw him as a threat. His quiet defiance, his whispered network, his refusal to be their puppet. It was a danger they could not ignore. And so they struck. Rumors spread like wildfire. Leo was accused of secret heresies, of secret dealings with foreign powers. Letters, forged but sealed with his own papal crest, spoke of alliances with forbidden sects. Priests whispered of a pope who had betrayed his faith, who dabbled in the forbidden. Cardinal Serafini, once Leo's patron, now became his most vocal enemy. From the pulpit, he spoke of faith and tradition, but behind closed doors he spoke of revolution. "We must save the church from the corruption of a false pope," he whispered, and many listened. Leo knew his enemies were closing in. He saw the fearful glances, the murmurs that ceased when he entered a room. Even those who had once supported him now questioned his loyalty. But he was not without allies. Father Matteo, always sharp and loyal, became his eyes and ears. "Your Holiness, they plan to force your abdication. They have gathered signatures. They whisper of a council, a trial, an excommunication." Leo's face remained calm, but his voice was steel. "Then we must force their hand." But his enemies were prepared. A midnight meeting in a forgotten chapel saw Serafini and his conspirators plotting openly. They spoke of poison, of a staged scandal, of using Leo's own sermons against him. And all the while, hidden in the shadows, Father Matteo listened. The next day, Leo stood before the College of Cardinals. His voice was calm, but his words were a storm. "There are those who speak of faith but practice deceit. Those who wear the robes of holiness but whisper in darkness, let them come into the light. And one by one, his enemies hesitated. They whispered among themselves, but they did not step forward. Fear had entered their hearts. But the council was not defeated. Not yet. They would not stop until Leo was broken or dead. And Leo knew that the true battle for the Vatican was about to begin. The Vatican was a fortress of faith, but now it became a prison of suspicion. The council's whispers became a roar, their plots sharper, their shadows darker. They were done with subtlety. They wanted Leo XIV gone, and this time they would not fail. Letters circulated, signed by cardinals who spoke of heresy, of corruption, of a pope who had betrayed the faith. The council demanded a trial, a tribunal to judge Leo. They spoke of excommunication, of stripping him of his sacred robes. They spoke of his soul's damnation. But Leo was ready. The Pope, who had once been a quiet bishop, now stood as a strategist. His network, led by Father Matteo, intercepted letters, whispered counter-rumors, turned allies against each other. Priests, who once plotted against him, now found their secrets exposed, their allies vanished. But the council had claws. A trusted bishop, loyal to Leo, was found dead, his body floating in the Tiber. Another priest vanished without a trace. Leo's own guards were bribed, his food tasted before every meal. Even his most trusted aides looked over their shoulders. Yet Leo did not waver. "They test my faith," he told Father Matteo, "but faith is a flame that grows in darkness." The council's grand plan came in the form of a midnight conclave. They gathered in the great hall, crimson robes flowing, faces shadowed. They spoke of Leo's sins, of his false piety. Cardinal Serafini, his voice sharp and venomous, stood at the center. "This man is no pope," he declared. "He is a blasphemer. He is a curse upon this church." But as they spoke, the great doors burst open. Leo entered, not alone, but surrounded by his loyal priests, by bishops who had seen the truth, by guards who had refused the council's gold. "Faith is not a weapon," Leo's voice thundered, "and the church is not your battlefield." Chaos erupted. The council's allies tried to shout him down, but Leo's voice rose above them. "You call me a false pope? Then let all who believe in the truth stand by me. Let those who whisper in darkness speak in the light." And one by one, the council's supporters fell silent. Some slipped away into the shadows. Others, their secrets laid bare, begged for mercy. Serafini stood alone, his face pale, his voice a whisper. "This is not over." But Leo smiled, calm and resolute. "No, Serafini. This is just the beginning." The dawn broke over St. Peter's Basilica, but inside its sacred walls, a storm raged. Leo XIV had survived the council's assault, but he knew his victory was fragile. His enemies were wounded but not destroyed, and shadows never truly vanished in the Vatican. But Leo was no longer a humble bishop nor a fearful puppet. He was a lion in the den of wolves. Days after the failed council, Cardinal Serafini gathered his remaining allies in a desperate final conspiracy. A whispered plan to seize the Vatican by force, to imprison Leo, to declare his papacy false. But Serafini did not know that his whispers were already heard. Leo struck first. Guards loyal to him stormed the secret meeting, arresting the conspirators. Serafini was dragged before the Pope, his robes torn, his face pale with rage and fear. "You speak of faith," Leo's voice was calm but thunderous, "but you know only ambition. You call me a false pope? Then answer for your sins." A public trial was held, the great hall filled with cardinals, priests, and the faithful. Evidence of Serafini's treachery, letters of conspiracy, bribes, and poisoned chalices were displayed for all to see. The cardinals who once whispered against Leo now bowed in shame. Serafini's voice was a whisper. "Mercy, Your Holiness." But Leo's eyes were cold. Mercy is for the repentant. Serafini was stripped of his titles, cast out in disgrace, and vanished from history, a man consumed by his own shadows. But even as the storm cleared, Leo knew the darkness lingered. He stood on the grand balcony, gazing at the sea of faithful below. "Faith is not a fortress of stone," he whispered to himself. "It is a light, and darkness will always seek to snuff it out." He raised his hands, and the crowd erupted in cheers. To them he was a savior, to the shadows he was a threat, and to himself he was a shepherd, forever walking between the light and the darkness. But he did not walk alone. Father Matteo stood beside him, loyal and unwavering. "Your Holiness, the Church stands because you stood." Leo smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "Perhaps. But I have learned that faith is not simply given, it is fought for." And as the bells of St. Peter's tolled, Leo XIV knew his battle was far from over. But he also knew he was ready. If you've been captivated by this tale of faith, betrayal, and courage, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Uncle Luke Tells. There are many more hidden stories of history waiting for you.